Alright, good evening folks, it's Enforcer Matt and welcome back to another short war video, and today we have very big news coming out of Russia that one of Russia's biggest chemical plants has caught on fire and exploded, and it is a pretty big loss for Russia. We're also getting word as well that Estonia is thinking about deploying troops into western Ukraine to help shore up the frontline defenses, and finally we are getting word that the former Russian General Surovikin has returned to the Kremlin for some unknown reason, and he's currently there right now. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into our first piece of news for the day, which goes to Null Reports. And in this post, we can see that a fire has broken out in very big style in Russia, specifically in the Chuvashia region in Russia. A huge fire broke out at the Chemprom plant, which is a chemical industrial plant, which is actually the biggest, one of the biggest in Russia actually, producing over 200 products. And we do have video evidence here of this fire, so let's take a look and see how big this actually is. And as you can see, this plant is on fire, and considering the fact it produces chemicals, there is a lot of flammable material here to actually keep this fire going for quite some time. And as you can see, the fire apparently has spread quite a bit from what this original video showed, because that plant is in tatters right now, and that is a big loss for the Russians, because once again, this is one of their industrial bases of manufacturing, and they can't afford to lose that. So once again, another big loss for the Russians. But moving into our next post here, we actually have one from Status 6, Military and Conflict News on Twitter, and this is also another big piece of news as well. We're learning here that the Russian Army General Sergei Surovikin has now visited the Kremlin as of today, reports multiple Russian channels, and we'd actually heard that he was coming back from exile in Africa just about a couple of days ago, and now all of a sudden he's actually at the Kremlin. So nobody's really sure why he's back, but nonetheless he is back and apparently speaking with Putin. And we also see some more detail here that Surovikin was detained by Russian authorities for his role in the Wagner mutiny almost a year ago, which seems like forever at this point. And it says in September of 2023 he was appointed the head of the CIS Coordinating Committee for Air Defense, and since then he was seen mostly in Africa. So once again, just like we recently saw with Shoigu, Shoigu was put off into a position sort of off in the corner to get him out of the way. That's essentially firing him. That's essentially what happened with Surovikin as well. Once he was suspected of working with Wagner in that coup, he was basically put off in the corner and sent to Africa to get him out of Russia because they don't want him around for whatever reason. And now we're learning that he may be coming back. So we'll have to keep an eye on this and see what happens with it. But Surovikin is once again running back around in the Russian circles. But with that, we're jumping into our next post here, and this one goes to Phytux News. And once again, we're hearing talk of countries potentially sending troops into Ukraine to help them with their frontline defenses, and this time it's Estonia. It says here in the post that Estonia is seriously discussing the possibility of sending troops into western Ukraine to take over non-direct combat rear roles from Ukrainian forces to free them up, says Estonia's national security advisor to the president. So this is a pretty big deal as well. This is one of the first times that we're hearing Estonia offer to send troops into Ukraine. And based on what we're reading here on non-direct combat rear roles, so I'm not really sure exactly what that would entail, but nonetheless, the big piece of news is these would be troops going into Ukraine to help Ukraine that are not Ukrainian forces. So that is what's most concerning about the situation, is we're not sure how Russia is going to view that. But nonetheless, if this is being discussed out in the public, apparently the situation around Kharkiv and the other hotspots in Ukraine are getting very hot, and Ukraine might need to free up some more forces, and that may be why Estonia is suddenly discussing and also offering to do this. But anyways, moving on to our next post here, we have one from Null Reports, and this is also another interesting piece of news. We're getting word that not only was Shoigu ousted and put out as the Minister of Defense of Russia, we're also learning that the spokesperson to Shoigu, Igor, I can't really say his last name here, I really don't know how to say it, but now he is reportedly resigned as well. So this guy right here was one of the liars-in-chief to the Ministry of Defense, and now this guy right here is out. He's resigned. And I have a suspicion that he's maybe been forced to resign. That's probably more like it. He's gone, and also Shoigu is gone as well. And the Ministry of Defense is having quite a big shakeup in the last week or so. But with that, we're jumping into our next post here, and this one goes to the Ukrainian front. And we've got some very positive news for Ukraine on this one. We can see that Germany has announced the transfer of the third Patriot air defense system to Ukraine, and the Chancellor of Germany pointed out and emphasized that it was not an easy decision because we don't have so many of of the Patriot systems. And this is something that many countries are starting to run into a problem when making the decision of whether or not to send Patriots to Ukraine, is they're saying that they're pretty short on the missiles for it and also the systems themselves because they're simply so expensive. And here we see Germany stepping up to the plate and actually giving one of those over to Ukraine, which is a very noble thing to do in my opinion, and we'll have to see if other countries also follow suit. But nonetheless, Ukraine is getting another Patriot, which is very good to hear. But with that, we're moving into our next post, and this one goes to OSINT Technical, and we're learning that overnight, a Russian freight train crashed at the Katlubin station in the Volgograd Oblast, catching fire and temporarily blocking the Moscow-Volgograd line, and Russian outlets report that a Ukrainian drone hit the train, causing it to derail. And as you can see, let's take a look at this video real quick. This is a hell of a piece of damage here. Let me make sure the volume's down. And you can see that it is absolutely horrible damage out here. The trains are flipped all off the tracks. This is a catastrophic derailment, and all of that lumber or cargo, whatever they were carrying, is now on the ground. So indeed, quite bad for the Russians, and also another big drone strike by Ukraine, this time hitting some of the supplies going down the railways. So very good to see. And I see the Russians have their little janky crane out here trying to pick up all the train cars, but that's not going to be probably big enough. But anyways, moving on to our next post here, we have one from Fintech's News, and we're getting some word about the situation around Kharkiv, which is rapidly heating up. And we're getting word that more than 30,000 Russian Federation troops are currently advancing in the northern part of the Kharkiv region, says the Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, reports RBC. So a actually pretty decently moderately sized offensive here by the Russians. It's not as small as some might have expected, so this kind of brings us back to the debate of whether or not this is an actual offensive or simply a ruse to basically distract Ukrainian forces to punch through another part of the front line. And right now, based on this number right here, which is being reported by Ukraine themselves, it sounds like this might actually be a legitimate offensive that is simply not a ruse, although I wouldn't rule that possibility out just yet. But right now it's looking like it might be legitimate because 30,000 troops is no small number, and it looks like the Russians are throwing all their troops that they have left to spare at this Kharkiv offensive. But also one thing I want to note as well, it says according to him right here in the article, it says according to him initially about 50,000 Russian troops were concentrated at the border. So right now we're saying about 30,000 or so is currently advancing on Kharkiv, but there was about 50,000 at the border. So there are about 20,000 give or take troops that are not actually participating in this offensive according to the Ukrainians. So it makes you wonder, where did those troops go? So that's why I say don't rule out the option this is a ruse just yet. But nonetheless, we'll just have to wait and see. But with that, we're jumping into our next article here, and this one goes to Fintech's News as well. And we're also learning that Russia stationed small assault units near Ukraine's Sumy region, says the head of Ukraine's military intelligence. And Budanov earlier told the New York Times that he expects the assault on Sumy as soon as the situation in Kharkiv is stabilized. So once again, just another indicator that the Kharkiv offensive may not be the actual main offensive that is going to take place here. Once again, we are seeing these are quote-unquote small assault units, but at the same time, keep in mind that Russia is planning a very large summer offensive, and that these could be the tremors before the actual storm that actually takes place. But nonetheless, the Ukrainians are fighting very heroically here. They're actually holding off the Russians pretty well. However, the Kharkiv region is a very tough fight, and right now there are some losses on both sides. Don't count anything out just yet, and the Ukrainians are holding their ground. And with that, we're moving on to our next article here, and this one goes to Null Reports. And we are getting word that in the coming days, the U.S. will announce a new military aid package to Ukraine, says the U.S. National Security Advisor. So once again, very good to hear, and we're not sure what's going to be in the military aid package just yet, but this fellow right here, which some people are somewhat angry with right now, to be perfectly honest with you, this fellow says there's a new aid package coming out, so that's very good for Ukraine. And moving on to our next post here, we actually have one from Null Reports, and we are getting video evidence that in the Bakhmut direction near Andriivka, a Russian Batmobile, or Russian Haas, was taken out, while also other destroyed equipment can be seen burning. So let's take a look and see this destroyed Russian Haas. So as you can see, here's the Russian Haas, and boom, it took a direct hit, and that thing is looking extra junky out here in the battlefield, and now even worse now that it's been actually taken out. And as you can see, there is not just this piece of destroyed equipment, but also all along the battlefield, tons of Russian destroyed equipment in the Bakhmut region, and definitely the Ukrainians are letting the Russians have it down in this area, and that's pretty much status quo for the entire front line. The Ukrainians are hammering Russian equipment, and not even the cheap modifications to the Russian Batmobile or Haas is helping out the Russians' efforts. So very good to see indeed. But with that, we have one more post to cover for the day, and this one goes to Nexta, and we're learning that F-16s from Denmark will be at the disposal of the Ukrainian Air Force within a month, says the country's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen. And remember, we're also being told that the United States is going to deliver their F-16s around mid-June or so. So we're holding out hope that the F-16s will actually arrive by then, because that would be a game changer. I know people are tired of hearing that, but it's just the truth. The F-16s would be a game changer for Ukraine when it comes to fighting the frontline attacks. So with that, that is our last piece of news for the day. And I hope you found this video informative, and if you have, please press the like button and also subscribe to the channel as well, because that greatly helps us get the news out there. And also, if you want to support our operation, which we're almost entirely crowdfunded by the viewers, you can go to our Patreon page, and the link is in the description below for that, and you can sign up over there and help support the channel in a big way financially. So with that, thank you all for watching. We'll see you all tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on our nightly War News stream, and bye-bye for now.